This is a podcast from the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hope. Sometimes we need help finding it. And sometimes that help comes in the form of stories of people who've lost it and found it yet again. That's why we're here. Welcome to Hope with Ramona Holloway. Today, hope is coming from what some might consider a very unlikely source, the mother of a child who completed suicide. Trigger warning, it's not easy to hear about hopelessness, but that's not why we're here. We're here to meet April Simpkins, the wife, the mother, the survivor, the hope giver. For our very first hope session, I had to invite someone who has inspired me. And she's been doing it since 2001, inspiring me for over 2 decades. Her name is April Simpkins. April, when I first met you, you were Mrs. North Carolina, yes. And to me, you always will be.
It's a lifetime ago, although I do still look at that sash every now and again just to remind myself. Yeah.
April, how have you been?
Sometimes I take it moment by moment, but right now I'm doing great. It's good to be here with you. Mm-hmm. Right now, in this moment, I'm doing great.
Great. Not just okay, you're great.
I'm doing great. And, one thing I've learned to do when people ask me how I'm doing is to really do my own personal self-check, to not answer that question with this kind of automatic response, but to really take a second and assess where my headspace is at. How am I feeling physically?
And that is counterintuitive for me. I don't know about for you because, I worked with a guy who, when you say, hey, how are you? He'd say, fine. And I hope you are too, because he wasn't going to stop to listen. And I assume that people don't want to listen. Right. And not everybody wants to hear the real check. Sometimes it's just
Yep.
But when you're in those safe spaces with people who really want to know, how are you?
Yes. I promised myself, and I tell my children and people I care about, I'm like, instead of listening to that question and responding as if you're being interviewed, think about that question the same way you would a speed sign on the highway. When you see the speed sign, you immediately will check your speedometer to see how fast am I going. And so when someone asks me how I'm doing, this isn't so much a question I think of as responding to them as much as it is, let me check my speedometer. Mm-hmm. So when someone says, how are you? I don't care if they keep walking. I still will do my assessment. How am I? What space am I in? And what do I need to do if I'm in that space?
I have been in awe of you forever. But after you lost your daughter, after we said goodbye to Cheslie, there was a different admiration. Because I watched you take, I'm going to assume, the worst thing that could ever happen to you and turn it into yet another beautiful platform to help other people. Is there a roadmap for that?
I think it has always been my nature to want to help others. It's one of the things I loved about my career in human resources. I got to help other people solve something or advance their career in some way. And so I think because it was my nature, I knew eventually somehow I would use that to help others. And that has been my commitment, to live transparently, to provide encouragement, and to do it to help and in service of others.
On this journey, has there ever been a time when you thought you couldn't do it?
Absolutely. Right after Cheslie died, instantaneously, life as I knew it was gone. Nothing was familiar. Not
But
my
yet you're
morning
still
routine.
running an HR business. You're still a wife and you're still a mother to young children.
Absolutely. That was hard. Honestly, there were times when I really thought that whether I willed it or not, my body was just going to give out. There were many times the pain was so immense, I thought, this is what it feels like to die of a broken heart. Like I would hear that. People say they just died of a broken heart. No, I really thought that's what I'm experiencing. But every day I would wake up and yes, my husband still needs his wife. My 5 other children still need their mom. So regardless of where I was compelled to figure it out how I was going to move forward. Even if that was just this little tiny bit, I was still going to have to figure out how to move forward. And figuring that out was hard.
What were the biggest challenges to moving forward?
I think the biggest challenge initially was not wanting to do life without Cheslie because she was my person. And I didn't want to have to figure that out. I remember in an interview I said, one of my biggest fears is that I would live 30 more years and realize that I'd lived as long without her as I had with her. That was hard to get to a point where I was going to be okay with her not physically being here with me.
What about social media? I can't move beyond not just what it looked like for you to get calls from media organizations all over the world because
Yes.
her death was international news. So in your worst moment, here come all the reporters and influencers, and then your daughter's social media is wide open. Yours is wide open, and everybody has something to say or something to ask. How did you manage the social media?
I think that was one of the most damaging and traumatic parts of initially losing Cheslie.
Give me an example.
So when Cheslie died, she died in New York. It was not long after 7:00, 7:15 or so. I was in an exercise class and, I was going home. I was going to call her. I did this all the time. And so I'd read her text message to me saying that, by the time I read her message, she would not be alive anymore. And, I'm rushing home. I'm talking to David. We immediately reach out to the police in New York to have them go do a check on her. And so we're talking with police. During this time, there is now a post on Cheslie's Instagram saying something to the effect of, "May this day, bring you peace and rest," I think is what it said. And so we're waiting to hear back from the police with something. We got into her apartment. She's okay or she's stable. And so the police told us that medic were on site. And that took a couple of phone calls. And so now I'm thinking, okay, she survived this attempt. We need to get to New York. So we're trying to get to New York and we're on an airplane to fly out. And that was when the police told us that she was no longer with us. I'm thinking they must have tried to resuscitate her. And the resuscitation attempts did not work. So we turn off our phones to go to airplane mode. We land in New York City. And when we turn our phones on, they are blowing up with text messages and missed phone calls and all these things. And I'm trying to figure out what is happening right now. So we get into, an Uber to go to a hotel. I didn't even realize I made hotel reservations. And the medical examiner is now on the phone. So they would call me, and because the police, passed their number on, they would call me, and I would pass the phone to David because I could not talk to anyone. So I'm listening to David talk, and he said something about her falling. And when I heard that word, like I had no wind left in me. And that is when I realized that she jumped. And after I got past all the trauma of trying to remind myself to inhale and exhale, because I couldn't do that anymore subconsciously, we began to roll back the clock. The medical examiner is now talking to David about what is going on, and we began to roll back the clock and realize that by the time I'd made the first call to the police, my daughter was already deceased. We called the police around 8:30. So that is how everyone, the media, New York media, everyone knew that this woman had died, but they would not release her name officially until they told the family. So when the police made that call to me, everything was a go in New York. So there was really little time for us to say, please respect our privacy. That veil had been pierced. And so one of the calls that we made almost immediately was to Cheslie's dear friend and publicist, and got her on the phone so that she could shield us from what was going on. She's an expert in crisis management. And so we drafted a statement and immediately said, please respect our privacy, and that she was a person to contact. And I really believed, Ramona, that people would respect our privacy and that she would be the one that they would contact. And I don't even know how they got my phone number. People were now, at this point, the announcement had gone out that Cheslie was deceased. And so this final post that she left on her Instagram turned into people leaving condolences and other awful messages. And
Awful messages?
Awful messages. And so eventually we had to shut the comments off and just leave her post there. But our family is grieving and reeling, because it's not just me. The media is now trying to pierce the veil and contact every member of our family.
And you have school-age children.
I had preteens. And so Cheslie's father, is with us, and we're all saying, make sure we send everything to the PR
And for
person.
those who don't know, Cheslie's father is not David.
That is correct. David is her stepfather. Cheslie's father and I, split many, many years ago. David and I have been married almost 2 decades. But there were a lot of things that the family just didn't know. I knew because of my relationship with Cheslie. There were a lot of things the public did not know at this time. But as a family, we huddled together and we began to talk and share. And I shared with, everyone who was in our family. We began to talk about Cheslie's first attempt. And that was when her father learned that there was a first attempt. And
you'd never told her father?
I never told him. Cheslie was an adult when she had her first attempt. And my feeling was, first of all, she didn't even want me to know, because, when I got to the hospital, she was a little unnerved and she tried to play it down like, this isn't a big deal. Why are you here? And I'm asking her what's going on. And she's really kind of being coy with her response. But move forward from that, I began to support her. But I really firmly believed she was an adult and this is her business and her story to tell. She will tell whomever she wants to know.
Including her dad.
Absolutely. And other family members, not just him, but other family members. If this is something she wants to share with them, she will do that. That's not my place.
Right.
And so as we, sat there and spoke and talked, and I shared as many things as I could, he was taken aback by that and hurt. And, where do you put that?
Did he not know that she suffered from depression?
I don't know what conversations they had. I do know that their dad is incredibly supportive of the children. They all commend him on how he listens to them
Mhm.
and supports them. He's that dad who, when Asa played soccer, he'd be like, my son could play in MLS. He was that dad.
Right.
And so I don't know the relationship,
Mhm.
that he had
Mhm.
with Cheslie or things they talked about. But I don't doubt, I say this now from the perspective of a parent. I knew. And so I had the opportunity to live every day with Cheslie like it was my last day with her.
Mhm.
Because when you have a child, a loved one, someone who attempts suicide, that doesn't leave your mind. Could that ever happen again? And so I knew that. I knew to live every day and cherish every moment, but he didn't have that. So I don't know what unfinished business he may have felt or had, but I know that he was hurt, and rightfully so. And, I look back on that and I understand. And in the midst of him trying to make peace with everything and the trauma, he just lost his baby girl. Here comes a reporter who, instead of going through the proper channel of contacting the PR person that we told everybody, call this person, they contacted him.
Tabloid journalism.
Yes. And here is a grieving, traumatized father who was upset with me at the time, feeling like, why didn't you tell me? And
grief.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Grief.
And I get that. And so, he made his statements that weren't flattering. And that was just,
If I recall correctly, I believe the words were dysfunctional family.
She was very sad in her dysfunctional family. And without context, right? Without people knowing that this is a dad who just found out that, there was a prior attempt and some other things that were going on in her life. And, he can't say to her, why didn't you tell me? But he can look me in the face and feel like that was my job to tell him. And that is where that comment is tipping in. And, one of the things that hurt for him when we sat and talked about this as a family, because it impacted the whole family. This happened just days after she passed. Is he said, she sounded, talking about the reporter, she sounded so nice on the phone. And I thought, well, of course she did. There was motive behind that and getting him to let that guard down. And I hurt for him. And I was so angry at this journalist and all the other people who just give us a moment to get our footing and catch our breath. In those moments of trauma, you are going through, your emotions are shifting, you are dysregulated. And
I call it untethered.
Yes. And so, he shared with us as a family, as we were sitting there together, he apologized, and he really, we understood. He apologized. And so as a family, we all made the decision that I would be the one who would talk with the media. One, at that point, he don't want to talk to anybody. And I totally understand that. And two, because I was a public speaker, that was part of my job. So I knew how to respond and answer. And that was the agreement we all made. And so that is why after she passed, people heard from me more. And everyone else was able to process things on their own.
There was a point where, as someone who knows you personally, I had to back away from your social media and also from Cheslie's.
Yeah.
Because the accusations that were flying were disturbing. Yeah. And it got to the point where it felt unhealthy for me.
Yes.
But one of the things that I saw, in addition to the comment from your ex, was blaming pageantry.
Yes.
And I know that's something that, you basically passed the crown to your daughter, because she grew up watching you glow, and also to mentor in the pageant world. And now you have this daughter who has achieved the holy grail of pageantry, And they're saying that you drove her to this industry that killed her.
I mean, honestly, I had no idea the lack of empathy that existed in this world. And it was people who speculated, and I get that. I'm on this side of this whole story with Cheslie and what happened and other things. I'm on this side of it. I know when I'm on the outside looking in at someone else's story, I'm as curious and I want to know and I want to understand. But this has taught me never to do that again. When people say respect my privacy, I have learned 100% to just do that and accept immediately in my mind, I don't know the whole story. What people in those early days after Cheslie passed, what they did not know was that there was a first attempt. What was unknown was that she had left a note explaining what was going on with her. What they did not know is that she'd written this incredible, beautiful manuscript that talked about her why of pageantry. All of those things were known. And honestly, at that point, I felt like I don't know anybody anything. Say what you're going to say.
Good for you.
I came out, years later in defense of pageantry. As a matter of fact, Cheslie was Miss USA for 58 days. That does not define her 30 years of life. As a matter of fact, when Cheslie passed, she was removed from pageantry. She wasn't a reigning Miss USA. And she would tell anyone who asked how incredible that time was in her life. I could not have been prouder of the way she handled herself. I adored Paula Shugart, who was then the president of the Miss Universe organization that owns Miss USA. A phenomenal woman, supportive, never quieted Cheslie, but encouraged Cheslie to speak out and talk about things that matter to you, regardless of what other people say or think. Cheslie, when she was Miss USA, had a roommate. They live when you become Miss USA, you would live in the title holder's apartment, and your roommate was Miss Universe.
Oh,
so
wow.
As soon as Cheslie was crowned in Reno and she flew back to New York, Catriona Gray, who was then Miss Universe 2018, was Cheslie's roommate. She's around the corner. And so she had someone to talk to, someone who had experienced what she experienced and completely understood her headspace.
Right.
And Cheslie went on to compete, of course, for Miss Universe 2019. She placed top 10. Zozibini Tunzi from South Africa became Miss Universe 2019 and became Cheslie's roommate. So Cheslie was never alone. What a great way to offer support. There was a sisterhood. Yes, to offer support to someone who is reigning. So Cheslie could be there to mentor Zozie. And then, the same thing happened. It just kind of, anytime someone would win, they would move into the title holder's apartment and they would now have a different roommate. So Cheslie, a headstrong woman who wanted to go into pageants, went into pageants because that's what she wanted to do. Ironically enough, if anyone had ever met my daughters, I would have thought all along that Paige would be the one who would go into pageants because she loved makeup and loved doing hair. And to this day, she is 10 years owned an incredibly successful salon. It was Cheslie who wound up in pageantry. And I was happy to mentor her and to support her, but I was not standing there pushing her in a direction. I've been a pianist, just as another example. I've been a pianist since I was 11 years old, studied classically, became a concert pianist, went to college on full scholarship for music. I have a piano in my home. Never taught my children to play the piano. I said specifically, I didn't want that coach-teacher relationship with my children. I said, if you are interested in learning the piano, I'm happy to support you, but I'm not going to be the one.
You didn't
to
want to be the
teach you.
teacher.
I did not. And so I was that way with everything, including pageantry. I'm not telling you to go do pageants. If you want to, I'll support you. You want me to tell you which earrings I
Just
think are
like
cuter?
with football
I'm happy to.
or
Exactly.
anything else your kids want to
That is
pursue.
how we parented. My children became athletes because they were introduced to sports by sports equipment, not because we said, you're going to do this sport or you're going to do that one. Just not how we parented.
Speaking of your parenting, have you, during this journey, felt like you've had to defend your parenting?
I have not ever felt like I had to defend my parenting. Very early on, when the criticisms would come a-flying, I would remember Cheslie, who once said to me when I would see comments on her social media that made me just, hit the mother button and made me want to come out and say something. And she would say, Mom, those people don't even know me. They don't know you. They don't know us. And she would just go on and on. And so her words would ring back in my head when people would say things. I would think, you say that because you don't know me. People who know me know how much I love my children, how much I support my children, how incredible my children are. People who know me know that, and those are the people who matter.
There was a post not long after Cheslie died, and it might have been Jet's birthday. And you posted that it was Jet's birthday and that you were trying to show up for him with as much joy as you could.
Yes.
How does a mother continue to parent while grieving? And you've had your own battles with depression. I mean, this sounds like the perfect storm for a breakdown. How?
Ramona, when I would post one day at a time on my social media, that's almost a misnomer, because for me, sometimes it was 1 second at a time. It was 1 millisecond at a time.
Because of that pain you were feeling?
Just trying to show up for my children when I was hurting, and my children all knew how close Cheslie and I were. And so they were hurting for me, and they were
hurting for you. Yes.
The pain was everywhere. I had always been the anchor in our family. When we would do a family vacation, I would be the one to kind of kick that off, and then people would, kind of jump in. And to find myself in a place where I didn't feel like I could lead, or, I felt helpless and worthless at the same time. And I spent a lot of time.
Helpless and worthless.
I did. I felt like I was no good to my family. One of the first trauma responses my body went through was the loss of my appetite. I could not taste food. So I stopped eating, not because I was trying to harm myself by not eating, but there was no desire. And people were sending food. My house was full of food. And I could not really smell it. I couldn't taste it. I was dependent on people sending that food. I'm telling you, when there's a trauma and people start the food chain, send some food, because I could not lift a fork to my own mouth, much less prepare a meal for my family. I had to immediately learn to depend on the kindness and support of others when I had never had to do that before in my life. I was the one that people looked to or depended on. And there I was. I felt worthless. Like, how I'm just here and everybody's having to figure it out for themselves. And it made me feel like I was failing my children as their mom. And so every day I would have to figure out how to show up in some way for them. But Cheslie passed away on January 30th. Jet's birthday, February 4th. He was turning 13. He was going to become a teenager. there was no cake, no balloons. My house was filled with food and plants and condolences and this heaviness of sadness. And I didn't want him 20 years from now to look back on his 13th birthday and feel like it got erased somehow. So I did. I reached out to people on social media and said, my mama heart just, wants to see something, happiness for him. And people showed up. Dear friends who know me, they stopped by, they brought gift cards for him and cards and gifts, and it was wonderful.
You couldn't be happy in that moment, but you found a way to bring happiness into your home.
Yeah.
When did happy start returning for you? Because in the media, the pageant training has reigned supreme because you have appeared so poised and so prepared to educate us on mental illness so that we know a little bit more. Maybe someone hangs on a little bit longer. Someone reaches out. You've done that so incredibly well.
Thank you.
But I know that there had to be times when it didn't feel like you were doing well. When did that begin to return? Was there a moment where you realized, okay, I'm not hurting every moment. It's no longer second to second. I'm up to 24-hour segments here.
It took a long time. I'm not even sure I could hit a marker. I remember after Cheslie died, it was probably a few months after she died, I was really wrestling with laughter and happiness. The guilt I would feel if I laughed. Mm-hmm. I wrestled with it to the point that one of my best girlfriends came over to my house just to sit with me because I was so distraught over feeling guilt over laughing or being happy. I felt so awful that it sent me into a depression. And my friend came over because I think she realized too, like, April is really struggling with her emotions, which were so...
And also your appearance changed because you're not eating.
I looked awful. I know I looked awful. And, one of the things that happened with me when I was losing so much weight is I brush my teeth, and many of us brush our teeth. You look in the mirror, and I noticed that there was a lump on my throat, and I thought, well, that's weird. Where did that come from? And so, and then I found another, like I could see it, and now I'm, I didn't want to say anything to anyone because I'm thinking, oh my God, on top of everything else, is this what cancer looks like? And when I found a third lump, I told my doctor, I told David, and then,
you waited till lump number 3?
Number
Ma'am.
3. And went to see my doctor. And in that moment, Ramona, I didn't care about myself, but I thought to myself the entire time that I can't die right now, not because I found my life so precious, but because I couldn't do that to my family. Mm-hmm. And when I talked to my doctor, and he checked everything out, and he was explaining to me a few things. One, that those were my lymph nodes. And 2, he said, a lot of this, April, is just normal. You are seeing it now. Wait for it, because you've lost so much weight that everything is showing. And I just thought, how much weight have I lost? And that was probably when I really looked at myself, and I didn't recognize myself, Ramona. I didn't recognize myself. I needed a lot of intense help because I gained this Herculean will to live and to make something out of my life. And that's when I knew that, honestly, I need to help others. This is what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And I found myself with a will to live.
Okay, because I think this answers a question that I've had about digging into and finishing the book. Because I don't know if a lot of people know that the Cheslie's book was pretty much done, but the publishers
Yes.
wanted something more.
Yes.
So now, on top of this grief, you're digging into this passion project.
Yes.
And I am guessing that passion project deeply tied to that will to
Amen.
keep breathing.
100%. Cheslie, when she sent me her final message, she listed in there her final wishes. And there were several. But one of them was to see that her book be published. And, Cheslie, when she was writing the book in 2021, she had already talked with the publisher. Like, they were negotiating the contract. And it was pretty much for her a done deal.
Mm-hmm.
So for her, it's kind of like, hey, I just need you to kind of see this through, so to speak.
Right.
And the publisher, of course, because Cheslie did not write that book with her passing in mind, she ends it on this high note. If you read the book and you get to her final chapter, she's kind of talking about how we're all, kind of in this pageantry world and weaving. And, the publisher didn't see this book as answering all the questions that were out there now, because she is not here. This book is beautiful and well written and all these other things, but look where the final chapter is.
Right.
So they did not move forward. And here's your manuscript back. And I had this charge. And so in the midst of all this pain, of fear of dying and all these other things, I had to fulfill her wishes. And so, that's fine. There's many publishers out there. So we just went on, asked another, and working through an agent. And we were just getting a lot of no's. And finally we were getting some good feedback, and part of the feedback we got is, how did we get from this happy ending to where we are right now? You need to help us understand how we got here. And so I had to do something I was not prepared to do, which was write. I didn't tout myself a writer. Cheslie wrote a book. But if that's what it was going to take to push this past the finish line, then that's what I was going to do. Interestingly enough, when Cheslie was working with this initial publisher, they had an editor. And Cheslie worked with the editor on the project. The editor left that publishing house. And I'm telling you about God's intervention, because I now had to finish off this book.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. Let me go back. I had no idea that when you finish a manuscript, that's kind of like the start of the race. That's not finished. There's a lot that has to happen between I finished a manuscript and here's my finished book. But that editor, who was now working independently, she and I connected. And she said, I'd spent all this time wondering whatever happened to the book. And so I brought her up to speed, and I said, now they want me to do this thing, and I don't know how to do this thing. And the irony that the same editor that talked to my Cheslie, that worked with my Cheslie, was now going to work with me to bring this book to completion. I knew this is the way it was supposed to be. And what was beautiful is when you go through the editing process, sometimes there are things you need to tighten up and need to add to and other things. And the fact that this editor had talked to Cheslie about some of the things in the book. So she was able to say, I remember when, we were talking about this, or she was talking about that. And we were able to finish that project for her. And there was a publisher who listened to the pitch and said, yeah, let's do it. And we were off to the races.
Anyone who reads the book, what are you hoping they take from it?
So I say this as a mental health advocate. One challenge for people who are in those dark places is feeling alone, is feeling like no one understands, no one's ever been here. This is like, it's unique to you.
And to tell you, if you're on social media, those fears are confirmed.
Yes, yes.
May I repeat that for the people in the back? Because you might be watching this on social media. Your fears about no one understanding and hopelessness can oftentimes be confirmed in the comments.
Yes.
Not just on what you post,
yes,
by reading what's posted by other people who are going through the very same thing.
Yes, absolutely. You know, the number of people who would look at Cheslie's social media and see these iconic moments and form their own conclusion that life must just be beautiful for this woman. I mean, everything must fall into place. She must be the most confident woman ever, never has a bad day.
I mean, never had a bad hair day. Never.
Absolutely. And you would think that.
And it was just baffling to me how many people said, but she was so beautiful.
She had so
Is depression for ugly people?
She was so smart. She was so, and she was all of those things, and she was battling a mental illness. And so my hope was that when people would read that book, they would feel seen. Like, I feel this way too. Oh my gosh. Cheslie was battling imposter syndrome. Cheslie felt like a fraud. I feel that way too. What? She felt confused. She felt like people were saying these things and that's how it was impacting her. Me too. When you looked at yourself, you thought you were a failure. You thought you weren't smart. Me too. I hope that people will realize that they're not alone in those moments. And may that be the catalyst that says, I can do this. I just need help. I just need to connect with the right therapist, or I just need to talk about it. Or maybe they've had difficulty explaining it to someone, what's going on inside. And they're able to pull out that book and point to paragraph number 3 on page whatever and say, read this. This is what I'm talking about. Just the same way as we will go on social media and we will identify with a meme and think, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. That's how I've been feeling. And send that to someone. Same. I'm hopeful that when people are reading this book, that they understand you're not alone, that there isn't a face of depression. Depression can hide behind a mask of confidence and beauty and all these other things. It's one of the reasons why, I worked with NAMI, the CEO of NAMI, Dan Gillison, who wrote the afterword, and NAMI was so kind to provide for us a list of resources because people receive help in different ways. There's books listed, websites, organizations, podcasts, a number of things. However you receive help, however you are willing to open up and say, okay, I realize what I've been dealing with, not okay, but I can get help.
And bigger than me. It's
Absolutely.
bigger than me. I've tried it on my own.
Yes.
I still don't feel like I can keep going.
Yes.
It's time to reach out. But what do you say to a mother who has a child who seems to be sad a lot, who has a child who might have expressed some suicidal ideations, who might have attempted suicide, who's living like they don't want to live? What do you say to that mom?
There's a few things that I say, and I have been asked those questions. And while I don't open up to everyone, people who are very close to me, sometimes when people reach out to me, I do ask to be part of their support circle because I completely understand the pain that they're dealing with and encourage them to reach out to me. Having said that, there are things that parents need to do right now The first thing I always tell people is go out and get mental health certified, mental health first aid certified. Go do that, because it is going to help you identify some of those things, not just in yourself, but to be picking up on some of those cues in others and how to get them to a resource. Get QPR trained, QPR, question, persuade, refer. It's suicide prevention training. Do that, because it teaches you what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. And again, how to persuade someone to go get those resources. And most importantly, learn to listen. The first thing we have to do is listen. The next thing we have to do is make sure that we connect with resources and support. I say this to every parent, because as parents, we want to fix everything, right? That's what we've done since
all
they
you
were
have
born.
to do is
Yes.
this, honey. All you have to do is that.
Absolutely.
And I think you even mentioned how after Cheslie's first attempt, you kind of went helicopter mom on
I did.
her, and it was too much.
She said so, and I'm thankful that she did. I'm thankful that she said, Mom, you are stifling me, as opposed to pulling away from me. And so I knew I had to learn how to listen. And what is so hard for parents and people in general, because we are always trained to fix things, either in our personal lives, we want to make it better, we want to be the hero, and our professional lives, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. Like, we are just, our mind is trained for that. But
Fix
what
it,
I had
move
to,
on.
yes, what I had to learn, and what I did learn in supporting Cheslie, was how to allow her to just not be okay, but to be there in that space with her so that she's not alone in those moments. And that took a lot of practice, but I feel like I learned that she knew that when she was in those moments, she could call me, and I wasn't going to try and give her, the pep talk and try to make everything perfect.
It's hard to resist the pep talk.
It is. And my husband, David, another phenomenal dad, David and I were at my son's basketball game recently, and his team lost. It was awful. It was a big loss.
Aww.
But my son played his heart out, like from beginning to end. And I was proud of him for that too. He fought to the finish. And when the game was over, he just looked disappointed. And, we were walking out to the car, and his dad was telling him that he played really well, and, Jet fired back. No, I didn't. And his dad went into pep talk mode. You were ahead in the game, and he was saying all the great things.
Right.
Your head was in the game. You looked really good, and blah, blah, blah. But I could look at my son and tell there was a disconnect. And so I said to him, why don't you think you played well? And he said, because we lost. And I said, well, that was your team. How did you think you did? And he said, I didn't play well at all. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, because I only scored 5 points. And I said, I understand that. They make you feel. And just listened and let it sit there. And just let it sit there without trying to make him feel better. We got in the car. And of course, I'm side-eyeing my husband and let him know, don't say anything. Just be here.
You're giving him the look.
Moment. Yes.
The face.
Just be in this moment. Just let it rest. And he did. And, and after we got home, I was talking to my husband about that moment and using that as an example. And I said, you have to learn to let them not be okay and just be there with them.
Because they develop coping skills.
Absolutely. And they learn that it's okay to not be okay, because the minute you make your child feel like not being okay is wrong or bad, and your whole mission—
That's how I grew up.
Yeah, is to be better, to be okay, your child will fake okay to make you feel better. And that's when they start packing that stuff in boxes and putting it on shelves.
The training, did it help you to worry less about the mental health of your other children?
No, it didn't make me worry less, but it made me a far better listener with my other children. I think it gave them the permission they needed to talk with me. one of the challenges when you have someone in your family who is battling a mental illness, and I want to say this, even if they're battling a physical illness, it consumes the family, right? It dictates almost sometimes how the family moves and maneuvers.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I am spending so much emotional energy on Cheslie, I am relying on the fact that my other kids are okay. I need to focus on Cheslie. And so when Cheslie passed, I learned a lot from my children. You know, they don't want to pile on me. I'm dealing with so much, but they still need me. And so I had to learn how to listen. I had to open a door to some criticism, and that wasn't easy.
But from your children?
But I had
That's
to
allowed?
learn how to Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that is the part of listening that we miss. And, you know, when I say listen and communicate, that means doing that without shame, blame, criticism, or judgment. And we as parents do that without intent. These are the things we say to our children. What have you got to be sad about? What have you got to be upset about? So I can't get you those shoes. You know how many shoes you have in there? Instead of listening and understanding that in this moment, they're not okay.
Yeah, I grew up in the shut up or I'll give you something to cry for era.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's that. So we have spent all those years silencing our children and then assuming they're okay because they've learned not to bring that to us, to try to figure that out on their own, and many times feeling alone. And we pull that into adulthood. And so many, the pain of that will drive them to substances or other coping mechanisms. I learned how to listen to all of my children and rest right in that place where I was a supporter and not fighting to be a savior and save them from something. That was a tough lesson.
It sounds like something you're still working on.
Absolutely. You know, I think as a parent, it's a rewiring because, you know, I share in the book when I talk a little bit about my own self, because my coping mechanism is busyness, which allows me to not feel, but to always just stay in my headspace. I became a wife at 20 and a mother at 21. And so my entire adult life, and I tell my children, you're not even fully grown until you're 26. Like things haven't even closed up. Mm-hmm. So my entire adult life from 20 to now has been focusing on the needs of others before myself. And that meant I would have to shut down parts of my own self so that I could make my children, my husband, my current husband, the primary, and I be the secondary. You know, as a mom, I was that mom. If there were 2 cookies left and I really wanted both cookies, but my son said he wanted the cookies, take the cookies. What I feel doesn't matter. What I want doesn't matter. I'm here for you. That has been the definition and the defining moments of my entire adult life. I almost don't know how.
So how did you get here where you're giving yourself a little bit more permission? Because without giving yourself permission to do this stuff, I can imagine that we wouldn't be seeing this together woman that we're seeing today.
Yes. Intense therapy. You know, after Cheslie passed, I was meeting with my counselor weekly, talking through things, unpacking boxes of issues that I'd had to put on a shelf because I needed to tend to my family, my children, my business.
So when you were talking to this therapist, it wasn't just about Cheslie's death.
Correct.
It was about unpacking a lot of stuff because now you have this thing that has just overloaded your pain bucket.
Yes.
And it is overflowing. So now you're not just unpacking this trauma that the world is watching. Yes. You're unpacking a lifetime of trauma at the same time.
I don't know that I would say I was unpacking a lifetime of trauma, but what I was unpacking is how I address pain, because I didn't allow myself to experience pain. I couldn't. It didn't matter if I was hurting.
You had to be tough. You had to keep moving. You had a company to run. You had a family to run.
That is what I had to learn.
Right.
Busyness was my coping mechanism. I have shelves of awards and honors that I've achieved because I could keep moving. I could do things. I could make things happen. But you can't busy your way through grief and depression. It will catch up to you in ugly ways. And I didn't want that for me or my family. And so I had to go through a process with my therapist of learning how to feel, how really to step out of my head and into here. And one of the first conversations we had was about safe spaces and who is safe and what is safe. And so, and if I go all the way back to when Cheslie passed and, that reporter breaking the veil and insisting on talking to Cheslie's father and him feeling like he was talking to someone he could trust and learning that trust had been betrayed by someone who took his words and fit them into her narrative to tell a story to try to explain why Cheslie was no longer with us, right? So for me, media was a very dangerous place. That is not a safe space. So when I would go and do an interview, I was already walking into that suited up like Iron Man. And, for some people who watched me in interviews, they would interpret that in their own way. Wow, she is so... I don't know how she's doing that.
She's so strong.
Yes, I would be, people would go, she's a narcissist. How could she be so put together?
I remember reading a comment that you weren't crying.
Exactly. Yep.
I was like,
I was determined because that is not a safe space for me to unpack my pain. As a matter of fact, when someone invites me on a program to talk for 6 minutes, I can't sit there for 5.5 breaking down when I'm there to talk to them. That's my only shot to hopefully reach someone who might be struggling. It's not about me even in that moment. And when I was talking with my therapist and we were talking about what is safe spaces, I took to heart the things that she said. And while I am there talking to someone to share a message, the person I'm talking to on whatever program, they're not my therapist. They're not my counselor. They don't know my history. They are there for that moment and that moment only, because they're moving on to the next thing and I'm left picking up the pieces. So I worked with my therapist and I worked with a media coach to learn how to get into a headspace to make sure I was there to deliver the message that I needed to deliver. And I had to learn after the first, few batches of ugly, unkind comments that if that's what you took away from that, then I wasn't there for you. But the person who felt seen in that moment, the person who said, oh my gosh, I need to talk to NAMI, or I need to reach out to a counselor, or hung on for another day because they understood there's help and hope, that's who I'm talking to. And rest there and be okay with that.
Hope can be hard sometimes.
It can be very hard. It can be very hard.
And I believe we get disconnected with hope very easily when mental illness is involved, when isolation is involved, when loss is involved.
Yes.
And you have connected with NAMI, an organization that helps in that space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I'd never even heard of NAMI until I was talking to Dr. Sue Varma. I'm going to give her a shout out. She's an incredible woman. I'd gone on a television program and she and I were in the green room after the segments. And I began to talk with her. I had already done Red Table Talk. And that was the first time I stepped out and publicly talked about what was going on with Cheslie. And after I did Red Table Talk.
Why'd you choose Red Table Talk first? Like
So,
of all the
shows.
everybody's calling you, and you're like, I'm gonna go over and see Jada and her mama and her daughter.
You
Like,
know what?
why?
There were a lot of things that went into that. And David and I talked and talking with our peer person. But one, I did not want to be on any I knew that we were going to talk because of all of the conspiracy theories and things and attacks on our family. And there were some records I needed to set straight, mostly so people would leave us alone and we could grieve.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to be some news clip of spit it out in 4 minutes before we go to commercial break. I could not do that emotionally. I did not want to talk where someone was going to do the same thing to me as they did to Cheslie's father, which was break things up and push me into some narrative to try to I didn't want that either. I didn't want to feel like I was on a jury seat with someone, if I start crying and they can't even reach across the table to pat me on the hand. So that eliminated some settings. But I'd watched a couple of short segments of Red Table Talk, and there were things that I appreciated. One, there weren't these commercial breaks. So it wasn't a case where I was going to be talking about the passing of my daughter and then it would be interrupted with a commercial about Tide software. You know what I mean?
Right.
Fabric softener. So I did appreciate that. I appreciated that I was going to be sitting there with two mothers who I knew, if there were moments when I couldn't speak, they would understand what I was feeling. And that sealed it for me. I was going to sit there with family members. I was going to be sitting there with women. I was going to be sitting there with two women who were a mother and one woman who was a daughter, about something that has killed off a part of my heart. I didn't, I knew when I went on the program that I was going to share part of Cheslie's final text message, because Cheslie said in her text message to share it with the world, share it with the public, I believe is the word she said. So I knew I was going to do that. And again, I did not want to do that on a program that was going to cut and paste and take out parts. Mm-hmm. And so I placed a lot of trust there. And after that program,
do you feel like you did the right thing in putting your trust there?
I do.
That's good to hear.
Yes. They were so full of warmth and compassion. During that segment, after the segment, we stood around and we talked, and there were some things going on at that time with my personal family. And, I needed that. So, yes, I am glad that we made the decision to step out in that way, to really be able to share a whole story and not a snippet of something cut and pasted here and there.
Right.
But after that, with people who were reaching out to me, I was not in a mind space where I could even help others. I'm trying to get my feet underneath me and deal with what was going on. We're dealing with her estate and other things we didn't know. So I was sitting there, and now I'm, in this small green room talking with Dr. Suvarma, and I said, I don't know what to do. I can't just leave these people on red. I mean, the stories that people shared let me know that Cheslie was not the only one. And when NAMI says 1 in 5 U.S. adults is dealing with a mental health issue every year, that is the God's honest truth. Because the people who reached out to me to say, I'm just like your daughter, I'm an achiever, but I feel just like this, and I feel my mother passed from suicide. And there were so many moms who would message me and say that they lost their child who didn't leave a note, and they adopted Cheslie's note as their child's note. I mean, the messages.
So you knew.
And
you knew that sharing was the absolute right thing, no matter how hard it was for you.
Oh my gosh, it was, yes. And so Sue, I said, Sue, I don't know what to tell these people. I don't know what to do. She said, have you ever heard of NAMI? And I was like, no, what is that? And she pulls it up on her phone and she began to talk about it.
NAMI.
NAMI. So she began to tell me all these great things about NAMI. And I said, oh, okay. And so I went home and researched it. And I was like, that's it. That's the organization. So I talked to someone who was able to connect me with, team at NAMI, and talked to Dan Gillison, who was the CEO of NAMI. And the more he talked, the more I thought, I want to be a part of this. So, we talked about me being a NAMI ambassador, and I couldn't say yes fast enough. And the more I learned about this organization, the more I championed NAMI and the cause. And not only are they everywhere, which is so important. They have
right here in our community.
Over 600 affiliates across the country. You can find them like this. Just go to that website, NAMI.org. There's a space where you plug in your zip code and bam, they will connect you with NAMI there. The fact that they had physical locations where people could meet together is so important. Many people got Zoom fatigue. For some, depending on what they're going through, I completely understand Zoom is a way that you can communicate, and they do have support groups online. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you could sit in a room, cry real tears with people who understood exactly what you were walking through and going through and dealing with.
Get a tissue, get a hug.
Absolutely.
Because one of the things that you said, why you chose Red Table Talk.
Absolutely. For me, I need that, and so I love that about NAMI. I love that, they provide family-to-family support, which is so critical, because if you have a family member or someone very close to you who is dealing with a mental health issue, you need support. You need to know
that
what to
part.
Do. You need to learn how to hold your boundaries, lest you become codependent
or
on
an enabler.
Them needing you. Absolutely. So the fact that NAMI provides this peer-to-peer, family-to-family counseling sessions, like it's not just getting together and talking. These are facilitated sessions to teach you
mental
as
health
a supporter.
Professionals.
They're facilitators, yes. And they are people who walk that path. So they are talking from their own experience. They are trained. I can't say enough about it. For so many people, even if it's your family member who is struggling, you feel alone. You need support. When you are watching a family member struggle with their mental health, you now start to wear a mask when you go to work. So here's a community you can connect with and take that mask off and be vulnerable and be transparent and be with people who understand, who just understand. Critical. And I knew that because NAMI does that, I wanted to be connected with NAMI. I wanted to be able to point all those people to NAMI. I'm not an expert. I am not a trained counselor. I am an advocate. I spend my time deep diving to understand this side of dealing with mental illness. I myself am battling depression, PTSD, the trauma of everything we went through. It wasn't just losing Cheslie. It was the police not telling me that my baby was no longer here, because feeding information to a news outlet was primary. I still don't know to this day how they got my daughter's final note when it was in her locked apartment, but it was published in this newspaper. So and in that moment, my ability to trust anyone vanished. And I was a very trusting person.
Have you been restored in that way? Can you trust again?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I no longer feel like I owe it. The people who I pull in to my circle have earned my trust. And that's it. Those people are there, and that's all I need. When I step out of my circle to talk to others, there is a part of me that is very guarded, because when I did trust, that trust was crushed by people I felt I should have been able to trust. So I don't, I'm very...
Go boundary! Go boundary!
I don't feel like I owe to people. And the people who are in that circle, they know who they are because they see this, they see the raw April. I don't feel like I owe people seeing me in the fetal position on the floor to prove I'm grieving. I'm grieving. People who know me know that. The number of times my children have had to hear me wail and cry out in pain, sitting in my shower because that was the only place that I felt like I could let go that ache. They know I cry. My friends who sit with me, just sit with me while I cry, they know that I cry. I don't have to go on a television program and prove my pain to people. Anyone who thinks I owe it to them, you are not my circle. I know my circle. And yes, that is a boundary I had to learn the hard way. And the PTSD, when people just say the things to me like, you can trust me, or just hearing that word, just hearing someone say that triggers things in me because it's almost like I'm thinking, no, I can't. The fact that you just said that, why would you have to tell me that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Feels like a trigger.
It does.
What about the role of God? Does God have a role in this story?
My faith is unwavering.
Always?
Yeah. I know enough about mental illness, like physical illness, to know that this wasn't something done to my daughter,
Not something done to you?
Absolutely. That her mental illness was not linked to her spiritual relationship with God and her belief in Christ. You can have a strong spiritual relationship and still be battling a mental illness. The same as you can be a strong believer and still be dealing with cancer. So
I love that analogy. I love it.
Yeah. So my belief system is unwavering. I put on my Instagram, that I'm a follower of Christ's teachings, and I do live that in my life and in the things that I do. I want to live out those words. So that stays intact. I've never been a person who shook my fist and said, why did this happen to me? I have always been a firm believer, Ramona, and I hear people say this, why do bad things happen to good people? And how could God let this happen to, people? And I've always been a firm believer that it is your strength, it is your belief in God or your higher power that gives you what you need to survive these pains of life. It's not something that is done to you, but it is your faith that will, like a strong boat in a rocky sea, that keeps you from capsizing and going under. That's how I view God and faith in the midst of pain and issue and some of life's ugliness.
But the beautiful part is, even though you might not be able to weather that storm alone, God
100%.
sends people in the form of family, in the form of
Absolutely.
friends who are like family, in the form of
Absolutely.
doctors, in the form of an editor.
And absolutely, yes. And that is how it's done. And
you can't see it though. You can't see it unfolding. You just have
can't.
to believe.
Absolutely. And so, no, there wasn't a shaking of my faith. I was honestly taken aback by the number of people who wanted to make the connection between mental illness and lack of faith, mental illness and lack of walking right with God. I was really angry when I would see people post things like, I wish I could have talked to her. I wish she knew Jesus. I wish she knew Christ. If she had only, pray. That speaks to me about where your faith is more so than it does about where Cheslie's faith is. To believe that to be battling a mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, OCD, is because you aren't where you need to be with God. What a terrible thing to say to someone. What an awful lesson to teach to your children, that if you're struggling with your mental health, it's because there's something wrong with your walk with God. Don't do that. Don't do that to your children. Teach your children that it is okay to have a bad day. It is okay to not be okay, and help them learn to move through that. And that may include prayer. That may include meditation. That may include a number of things, but it is not because you aren't right with God. I just think that's a terrible message.
Very dangerous.
To send to a child.
Because in God, some people find hope. So if a mental illness is robbing you of a connection, the last thing you need to be told is that it's your fault that it's happening.
And here's the education that I've worked really hard to impart. There's a difference. I was asked a lot when Cheslie's book came out, and then of course the reigning Miss USA and Miss Teen USA both stepped down, and Miss USA cited, to protect her mental health, right? And so of course people wanted to wrap that around and bring that back to me and ask questions about Cheslie and blah, blah, blah. And I said, listen, there is a difference between something taxing your mental health and being challenged with an actual mental illness. My daughter was battling a mental illness, a diagnosed mental illness. I don't know Miss USA's mental state, but I know when she says that these things that were happening were affecting her mental health, she did the right thing. But that taxing to her mental health does not mean she was challenged with a mental illness. Cheslie was dealing with a mental illness, and she fortunately got all the support she needed when she was part of that system. And so I say that to say, to parents, to people who are talking to friends and loved ones, because someone is talking about their mental health being taxed, it doesn't mean that they're saying, I have a mental illness. And yes, when your mental health is being taxed, there are things you need to do: de-stress, meditate, do some, other things that are going to help
sleep,
you. Absolutely.
Naps.
Yes.
Help more than you know.
Do those things to help your mental wellness. Do those things. That is very real. There are things that I go through that tax my mental health, but that is very different. That is not the identical partner of someone battling a mental illness. And so for parents, if you don't know, what is the signs? What does it look like if I don't know if my child is having a bad day or are they clinically depressed? That is why you want to go see a professional and sit and talk with a professional. That is where, when I say, stop trying to be a savior and be a supporter, the support is going with your child to talk to someone, to give your child the right resource to get to the bottom of what's going on with them. That's how you'll know. You're not, unless you are licensed and studied in psychiatry and a therapist, you may not pick up on signs. The second thing I'm going to say to parents is, if your child doesn't want you to know something, you probably won't know. Our children hide things from us all the time.
Think about it. There are a couple of things that my mom went to her grave not knowing about me that I would 100%. Never tell her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if your child doesn't want you to know, you're not going to know.
That just means that they're growing up.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important, and I say this, to live transparently about your mental health in front of your child, because that is the communication they need from you. The first language we all learn is nonverbal. When we are children, we learn to walk on 2 feet because you saw other people walk. You learn to put the food on the fork and put the fork in your mouth because you saw someone do it. You learned when you looked at a brush or a comb what it's used for because you saw someone do it. Our first language in communication from parent to child, adult to child is all nonverbal. That means our children are still watching us. How many children can say, I know that look on my mama's face? So how you manage your mental health, they're also watching that. So how about this as a parent? Communicate to your child what to do by your actions. Say it out loud. I am not in a good space right now. I am not okay.
Is that how you managed your depression in front of Cheslie? Did she know you had depression?
Cheslie knew that I was struggling with some things. I did not tell Cheslie what it was like for me. And that wasn't Cheslie specific. That is primarily because as an adult going into adulthood, I had trained myself that I'm not the primary here. So my belief was I don't talk to my children about what I'm struggling with. My job is to help them with what they're struggling with. And I have learned to change that. I don't know that that would have made a difference for Cheslie because I was there to support Cheslie. But I have learned with my children now to be very transparent. I don't have to be the superwoman in front of them. It's okay to cry in front of my children. It's okay to say, I don't know, but this is how I'm going to figure it out. It's okay to say that in front of my children. When my son says to me, Mom, how are you? As I said, for parents, I live transparently. You know, I'm not doing okay. This is what's going on with me. And I always follow that up with, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I'm going to go lay down for a few minutes because I'm not okay. Or, you know what? I feel great. I'm going outside to get some sunshine, or I need to journal, like whatever is going on, because again, that becomes recall for our children. So when I'm scrolling social media and I'm done because it just is not serving me, I will say, I need to put this down. This is bothering my mental health. Because my hope and belief is just like my child learned looking at that brush on the table, what the brush is for, my child will hear that and recall that and go, I need to put that down. I need to go outside. Or I keep
saying I'm going to wrap it up in my head, and then something else comes up. But I have to know: do you have limits on social media for your youngins?
Well, unfortunately, now Instagram has put some limits on social media for the kids. But yes, we did not allow our children to immediately jump on social media. We talked with them about what's going on with their social media. We connect with them. I'm sure they probably are listening to this giggling, going, we have private accounts, Mom. You don't even know. You think I'm blah, 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 but I'm really blah, 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 blah. But I do talk about the dangers of social media. I talk about that with my children. You know, I share with many people, I am a proud Gen Xer. And when I was growing up, when adults talked, they sent us out of the room. There are things we didn't need to be privy to. There were conversations we didn't need to be a part of. It's not even about learning what adults talk about. It's that the adults need to be able to talk like adults and talk about things with the wisdom that adulthood brings you, that a 5, 8, 10, 12-year-old has not yet acquired. Unfortunately, because of social media, our children see these adult conversations played out, and with their limited 15-year-old knowledge of thinking they understand everything, want to weigh in and form opinions, and that is not healthy. So I do talk to my children, and with conversations I didn't have before social media was around. And you know, one thing I don't want to do with my children is allow myself to live in the false belief that I told them not to do it, therefore they're not going to do it. You know, I hate to be the bearer of bad news and ruin the plot, but for parents who think that because you said,
if you weren't a perfect kid, guess what? You're probably not raising one.
Just because you said don't do it, and they're looking you in the face going, I would never do that, Mom. Just you know? And so I do talk to my children about the why. And I do listen to my children. And that, I think, has been such a blessing, because in learning to listen to them, I'm also prepared to hear what they have to say. And some of the things they've had to say, honestly, they make me go, okay. All right, well, okay, well, we're going down this path, I guess. But then, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe they told me that. I feel great. It feels great. No matter what it is, it feels great to think that they trust me, because trust is such a big presence in my world right now. So I love that. I love that, the relationship that I have with the children. I've always loved the relationship I have with my children. But
me too. I love the relationship you have with your children.
But after Cheslie passed, it honestly, it went deeper. It had to, because we all had a unified pain, and we all had to learn to deal with that pain in our own way. And I look at my children, and honestly, they are remarkable. They are remarkable people. And
they have a remarkable mom.
Well, I appreciate that.
I say that as probably one of your biggest fans. The book, your work with NAMI, what is next?
But first, I want to say they have a remarkable village. Like,
yes,
I'm gonna own it. I love it.
I can't interview the whole village right now.
They have a remarkable village. There are a lot of things that are coming next. The level of work I'm doing with regards. Of course, another book. Of course, another book. But the level of work I'm doing as an advocate, the things that I'm learning, everything I learn, I share. I have a little Post-it on my computer that really is a reminder, but it is also a theme for me. And it is, how can I help others with what I've learned? So when I'm acquiring knowledge, when I'm listening, I am automatically thinking, oh my gosh, how do I share this with people? How do I, push this out there? Someone needs to hear this. And so I continue to do my own homework and research and speak out loud. One thing I would love to do as I move through advocacy is begin to really lobby for additional funding for mental health services. I think it should be accessible to everyone. No single person should have to wonder about the cost when it comes to taking care of their mental health. So I'm a proponent of every organization that offers services without charging people, but I want to see us really stepping up to support the mental health and wellness of our citizens. So that's definitely coming in the works. We have the Cheslie Kryst Foundation. I am so excited about all the things that we have coming with the foundation. You'll hear so much more about that moving into 2025. But I will say this about the foundation and what our mission is and who we are out there to support. Cheslie was a creative. Many times people think Cheslie and they think Miss USA 2019, and I think that's wonderful. But there are so many more layers to her. One of the things that I said to myself when I thought through what Cheslie's legacy would look like 10, 15 years from now is I want people to think of Cheslie and immediately smile and recall something wonderful. It is a mission of mine to make sure that she is not defined by her death, but by her life. And Cheslie was a phenomenal musician. She was the most hilarious person. Her personality. She was an award-winning clothing designer. All of my children are incredible creatives, and they have leveraged that creativity as therapy and to help support their mental health and wellness. And I want to make sure that there are other children who have an opportunity to support their mental health and wellness with that kind of therapy through creativity. So we are out there funding organizations that leverage creativity as a way to support the mental health and wellness of our teens and young adults. Many people are familiar with music therapy, which is great. And this is about learning creativity, not for the purpose of being a performer, but for the purpose of your own mental wellness. And that's how Cheslie used it. That's how my other children use it. And that's what we want to promote and support. So great things coming in the future with the Cheslie Kryst Foundation. Additionally, at the top of the year, I'll be releasing my own podcast. The name of it is As I Was Saying, and it's an opportunity to continue a lot of the conversations that I've had where people have wanted more. Tell me more about this or that. And also with people I've connected with, like yourself, when there's more things that we need to say, and dialing deeper into our own experiences and how we can leverage that to help and support others. So I'm still a keynote speaker. I've been a speaker for about 15 years now. I've certainly added talking about mental health advocacy, mental health in the workplace as part of my repertoire. And so I have been fortunate and blessed to take many stages to talk to people in all walks of life about how to support their mental health, how to make room for people who are battling an illness, and certainly what it looks like to be a supporter, not a savior, and allow people to just not be okay sometimes.
Thank you for showing us what it looks like to be a mom survivor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work with NAMI, and it's NAMI.org.
Yes.
April, thank you.
Thank you.
If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, call 988. That's the hotline that brings help. Reaching out is incredibly important, whether it's you or someone you love struggling with mental health. If you have a mental health emergency, the number to call is 988. And if you'd like more information on NAMI, you can go to NAMI.org. That's NAMI.org. Thanks for sharing hope with me. If you'd like to connect, go to RamonaHolloway.com. You can find me on my socials. Once again, Ramona Holloway. And if you'd like to support this podcast, guess what? RamonaHolloway.com.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.